Happy Tuesday morning, everybody. I'm here on another morning with a Case for Travel Tuesdays with my special guest, Jill Browne, who has been researching family history and heritage since 1991. And her motto is genealogy and travel, find your past and go there. So welcome, Jill. I'm glad you're on the call with us this morning.
Hi, Charlotte. Thanks for inviting me. It's really fun.
Yeah, you're welcome. And as a tribute, the background today is Saskatchewan. So this is actually the farm that I grew up on.
Gorgeous.
So going back to my roots, a lot of the time before we go on travels, we head back home just to stay grounded and remember where we came from. So yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. You know, every province in Canada has their own special beauty, really, don't they? So this is a show about travel and the human connection. How do you think family history relates to that topic?
I think it relates hugely because family history is so much more. I mean, when people start out in it as a hobby, they kind of get on the trail of collecting birth, death, and marriage dates. And they draw typically, family trees that are pretty straight line. And there's fun in that. There's a sense of achievement. But when you go deeper, it's like, okay, well, like, I know they were born in such and such date and place, but who were they really? And then you start to learn about the happy and sad things in people's lives in the past. And I'm really fascinated, for example, with the journey of immigration and emigration. Every family who moved from another country, whether they did it yesterday or 300 years ago or even longer, that is a major, almost traumatic, sometimes truly traumatic event in that family's life. And once you start to think about threads like that, you recognize the commonality, whether it's your neighbor today or a person 300 years ago. Some of those life experiences are universal. And the more you think about birth, death, marriage, having children, those really basic things of life, the more you feel connected to others. And then the more you learn about your specific, not just your immediate family, but people of that date and place, people of that place today, the more you get into it, the more I think you develop empathy and connection. That's how it's been for me anyway. More knowledge led to more empathy, more curiosity about others, and then more knowledge again. So it just goes round and round, and the connection, the sense of connection builds in that kind of theoretical way and in a real way too, because I have made so many friends, some of whom are very distant relatives, like very distant back about 400 years ago, but we're good friends through that shared connection, and it's meant a lot too. So friends and some people are lucky enough to meet family in their travels, so all kinds of connections are possible.
Yeah, it's the meeting family, especially. My husband has a lot of relatives back in Belgium, and going back to meet them was wonderful. He had been back when he was graduated from high school. His grandma took him back over because she emigrated after World War II.
Wow.
And it's just, yeah, like I feel like I have another family on the other side of the planet. It was very special to me to meet them. Yeah, it was very special. And, I like how you said too, how it's happy and sad when people have immigrated, because it's the story of why they came over. Some of them are happy reasons, and a lot of them are leaving their countries for traumatic reasons.
Yeah, it's true. And when you think about people who did not leave, so in our own country, we have people who have been here for thousands of years. In other countries, the same. When we go back, I mean, for those of us who are transplants, when we go back, we see sort of the alternative life that we would have been living had our ancestors not moved. And I think when we travel within Canada or the US, especially if you get interested in Indigenous history and start to explore, I mean, there's a whole world opening up of Indigenous tourism, not just here in Canada, but in a lot of places around the world. And I don't want to imply it's new, but I think it's more, I know that is more consciously marketed than it has been. And that's another slice, like that's looking at the culture of the place we live that we are not, by blood connected to. And that is a whole other slice of how, you know, my family history now is shared with the people whose land I occupy. I mean, there's so much politics buried in that, and I don't want to be contentious about it, but I want to open up that possibility too, that we don't need to just look at our own history, because our own history now in Canada, the US, everywhere is a shared history. So we can really embrace, you know, many cultures, many histories through family history.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you and I both love history. We've talked about that a lot. What types of places do you find that are significant to your clients' ancestors?
I think there's kind of two categories, I guess. One is the very personal. So this is where genealogy and family history deviate a bit from sort of general heritage travel, but they're very closely related, of course. One is a subset of the other, but the family history, the very specific genealogy of your family will take you to potentially a specific house on a specific street in a specific village. So
Hmm.
enough to find that, and if it's meaningful, like it's not something everyone wants to do, just go stare at a house that your family lived in 300 years ago. That might not be a thrill for some people.
It
Like,
appeals to me.
it appeals to me
I would
too.
love to do that.
It appeals to me too, but I appreciate that that's not, you know, some people would rather be playing golf, and I
Yes.
totally get that. You know,
Yeah.
if you're a
Yeah.
golfer and you go to Scotland, I know what you're interested in, you know, but there's that sort of micro hyper focus, places my ancestors for sure went. And
Yeah.
that would include their homes, but also like their churches, their a really like emotional place is a cemetery.
Mhm.
I visit tons of cemeteries, and I have my own sort of guidelines for doing that. I do not want to intrude on or experience other people's grief. So I go to historic parts of cemeteries. I look for, um, or maybe I would say I would avoid, I personally avoid people's um, graves if they're sort of even within the last 80 years. I mean, depends, but I kind of
Mhm.
back off because it's the historic element I want, not the raw emotion. And
Mhm.
I really want to show respect for grieving families.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that brings us much more recent. But if I'm in kind of a historic area, and 80 is kind of a guideline. I mean, I also have really interested in military cemeteries, which loads of
Mm.
people are. And
Mhm.
because even if your family were not in the military, you know, there are wars that have affected us all. And it's, you know, well known that, and I think you've done this, and I have
Yeah.
too, gone to some of the battlefields in northern France, for example, and you mentioned Belgium. You know,
Mhm.
it's such a big part of our history that
Mhm.
whether you've got a known personal connection or not, that is still a meaningful place. So you were asking me about meaningful places. I would say cemeteries, like personal and kind of institutional, museums for sure, because if you can get to a museum that connects with the place that you are trying to connect with, it's like um, so easy. You know,
Mhm.
someone has already thought through what is meaningful about the history of this place and how do we best convey it. They've already done that work for you, so you just go there, take in what the museum has to offer. Ports and stations. Remember, especially for people who immigrated, but even for people who lived in one place, um, if they ever left their home to go to a major event or, you know, an annual something or other, even a
Mhm.
market, they went to the station. They got on a train, or in earlier days, they followed a path. And interestingly, if you study sort of historic geography and the history of roads, um, they're very stable. Like transportation routes on land do not tend to change very much. We add new ones, but the original ones are often the basis. You know, highways are former trails. And
Mhm.
the reason they're former trails is because they were the easiest way from A to B. So
Right.
stations, ports, old, like McLeod Trail is kind of a good example. That was like the road for driving cattle. I mean, that's for people who aren't here with us in Calgary. McLeod
Yeah.
Trail is a big road that basically links Alberta, where we are, to Montana. And when the
Mhm.
cattle ranching was starting, that's how they got a cattle up here. They walked them up what now we would think of as our big highway. I would say war memorials I've mentioned. Markets, like if you're in Europe, a lot of towns and cities still do have central markets. And they're still very active. You know, a lot of the activity, the goods may have changed, but the basic buying and selling person to person is still going on.
Yeah.
And churches, of course, you know, there's a whole world of churches and church life. And, you know, think about it. If a church was established some several hundred years ago while your people lived there, chances are, even if you are not observant, they probably were, just because it was a different kind of cultural milieu.
Yeah, I mean,
and
especially in
heritage
Europe.
sites. Yeah, in Europe and heritage sites in general. I mean, there's a reason why they are heritage sites.
Yeah.
It's not somebody just thought, oh, we need a heritage site over here. It's like they're significant. They've been assessed for their significance to that culture. So
Yeah.
So those are loads of places that I think, whether you know your specific situation or you don't, you can get a lot of connection with your own past by going to places that are sort of publicly available.
Yeah, and especially in Europe, with every village, you can tell is centered or was centered around the church. There's a church, and just look for the steeple. That's a town.
Yeah,
you know. So
it's a pretty obvious marker, isn't it? Like you just and the city center or the town center is usually, again, like the roads I mentioned, the center is a stable place too. You know, it's been the center forever. So, and usually there'd be a river and a bridge. Like think about that. Next time you cross a river, this river crossing again was selected because it made sense, especially the oldest bridges. You know, this was the place where everyone crossed the river. So they built a bridge, you know, and everybody has used that bridge, cross that river at that place. You're doing what people have done, you know, in some cases for thousands of years.
Yeah, it's certainly puts a different experience on the travel for sure. So do you feel that or think that your clients feel that they experience how their ancestors lived when they do this type of travel?
It's very much depends on the person and what's meaningful to them. So, you know, it's kind of that saying of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
I would never, you know, nor would you, neither of us is going to say, you must go here and feel this way. That's not how it works with anything. It's like being taken to an art gallery if you're not interested in that kind of art, or, you know, a movie that's from a genre you don't care for. So, you know, for something to be meaningful, you really need to know yourself. What interests me? What do I find compelling? But you can expand that range of feeling. You can always develop your interests in any direction you want to. So a little knowledge may open up in someone a whole world of curiosity where they didn't expect to find it. And so if you're open to, you know, feeling a connection with your past, learning more about it in a different way than we do in school, then yes, you know, people do get involved, get interested. And I would say the best way as a traveler is to walk if you can, or, you know, if mobility is difficult, or you just, you know, if that's not so much of an option, do still try to be on the ground, you know, experiencing things as close, you know, rather than watching a movie, walk around the block. Have a meal, you know, in a restaurant, eating the typical food of the region you're going to. Like, I guess what I'm saying is experience things firsthand in a touching, seeing, being there way. Not in a going to the library and reading books way when you're on site. Like when we're at home, read tons of books. When you're traveling, spend your time soaking up the atmosphere.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. So tell us about your personal experience in traveling back to experience your own roots.
Sure. So I knew nothing about my past, my family's past, I knew kind of vaguely that 3 of my 4 grandparents had a close connection with England. But I didn't know like what part of England. I didn't really know what England was all about. It was just a place, even though I was raised in a town that had really strong English roots, like in my town and in my family, most of the older people, well, not most, but many of the older people had English or Scottish accents. There was that much immigration and there was that much in my own family. It really meant very little to me until I moved. In 1991, we moved to London. And by coincidence, my dad had found some old papers. And anyway, long story short, that's what got me started on researching family history. I was really fortunate to live in a place where actually the records for my history could be easily located. This was pre-internet and you had to go in person to the National Archives, and it wasn't far from, it was accessible to me. I was able to take a course locally in how to do the research. I read lots of books. They had great libraries. And so that's sort of how I got started. And as I discovered, what I was really after was, okay, where? I'm less interested in the dates. I'm really interested in where in London or where in England or where in the United Kingdom generally am I connected to? So as I discovered places, we lived in London for 2 years, and I spent lots of weekends with, the kids were in school, but on the weekend we could go out of town, just going to meaningful places. So, a couple of places I went to, excuse me, when my dad came to visit, we went to Stoke-on-Trent, which is famous as a place where Wedgwood pottery comes from. And everything to do with beautiful pottery, I associate with Stoke-on-Trent, even though there are other great potteries in the world and in England too. But going to Stoke-on-Trent really connected me to the industry that my family was in when I was a child. And I didn't have ancestors there, but I had this connection and this interest because my young life had a lot of dishes in it. That was the family business. So that was one. And then finding, despite having many connections to England, I have only in my life found one graveyard where I have relatives buried. And finding that was a really great trip, because the place is at the north. It's almost as far north as you can go and still be in England. It's very close to the Scottish border and Hadrian's Wall, which was the Roman wall. So we're going back, 2,000 years. My ancestors, I have no idea how long ago they go back, but what I had traced was kind of the late 1700s. And I did find it would be my, I guess, 3 times great grandparents. I found their headstone in the local cemetery, tiny church, overgrown cemetery like they tend to be in England. And there they were. So that was very emotional, because it was the first time and one of the few times that I've found a spot on the ground in another country that I can say, yeah, I'm actually connected to this very place.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
There's their names right on it, right?
I have a friend who's in England now. She moved there, and she had put a comment on here. I never thought my town was interesting until I learned the town I live in was the burial ground for people. Oh, now I lost her comment. Who died in the plague from London, Gravesend. Yes, she's told me that. That's where she's living now, is Gravesend. And I'm like, I have got to come see you and see this place. And she also said too, was very surreal for me going to Warsaw to get my citizenship close to Remembrance Day, knowing my great grandparents left there before World War II.
And such a connection she has, going there, she must feel very emotional just to be in that place, and as she looks at, the Warsaw skyline, there will be things there that, she can legitimately imagine our ancestors having exactly the same view. And that
Yeah.
Gravesend is interesting because that, if I remember correctly, I believe that's where Pocahontas is buried.
Yes, she did put that note.
Yeah.
Pocahontas is buried
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
I did a research project a few years ago. I made a little map of all the places I could connect to Pocahontas in London. And that was interesting. It led to many surprising discoveries because Pocahontas was, in my opinion, a really intelligent woman and exceptionally good diplomat. And also, I think she was very selfless in trying to advance the interest of her own people. And she put herself last. That's my impression of her. But some of her travels in London are interesting because they actually took her to places you can visit as a tourist. So one of them is the Tower of London. She was taken there to visit. And that's an interesting story. And another is a historic site it's very central. It's between Trafalgar Square and the Houses of Parliament. It's called the Banqueting House, which is it is a major, a small but major tourist attraction. And she was, now the building on that site is a replacement after a fire, as fires happen, but not too distant in time from when she was there. So she was there, it burned, they reconstructed all within the space of less than 100 years. And what you see there is a place where the same kind of entertainment as she saw went on. So the Banqueting House, as you see it now, was purpose built to perform that kind of play. So it was kind of an upgrade for the theater that burned down. So she was in the generation before, very similar to, but what she saw was much less opulent than what they built. So yeah, it's interesting. You can trace a famous person, kind of getting away from your own family history and into the heritage side. If you happen to be interested in some historic person or some culture or event, you can always make a trip based on a quest.
Oh, interesting. So without breaking confidence, because I know you can't do that, are you able to share a travel transformation story from one of your clients?
Yes, for sure. Many, but I'll give you just one. So this goes back a few years. I did my MBA here at the University of Calgary. And at the end of our 2-year program, we went on a quite lengthy study trip, which some of my classmates and I extended with a personal vacation at each end. So nice. One of the kind of sub goals of our personal trip was to visit the World War I battlefields and cemeteries in northern France and Belgium. And one place I always wanted to see was Passchendaele because it's so significant to Canada, and Vimy Ridge is another. But one of my friends in this group, so we collaborated and we did a bit of research about World War I, and in particular about his grandfather's World War I service. Where had he been? And my friend knew quite a bit, and I was able to get papers from the National Archives in Canada. So we put all that together. We actually went to a few talks about World War I at the military museums here in Calgary, and tried to educate ourselves a bit about the context. When we were over there, it was, of course, exceptionally emotional for everyone to be in those places, particularly for him because he had that one-on-one connection. I mean, there were many teary moments, I have to tell you, for all of us. But one fun moment was when we were in Paris on this same trip. My friend had one photo of his grandfather and I think 2 of his grandfather's brothers. And it seems to me there was 5 in the photo totally, but they were in uniform on leave in Paris. So imagine, youngish soldiers in Paris, away from the horrible parts of war and having a break. So this is a very casual photo. It's not like a uniform at attention. It's like 5 guys sitting around having a cigarette. So we restaged the picture with fake cigarettes. I think we made them out of napkins off the table. And I had to be one of the soldiers because I think we needed 5. And yeah, we just, we had a photocopy of the picture and we reposed ourselves. And there we're on the Champs-Elysees, like pretty much in the same spot, doing the same thing, but of course in much more pleasant circumstances. So we had, the happy and the sad in the same trip. Very warm memories and a really strong connection, not just to his ancestors, but to, all Canadians who had been affected, and by extension, every person, who was affected by that war. You felt that connection at large and small scale. So that was an adventure.
Yeah, I hear that often, or well, maybe not often, but people will have that picture of their ancestors and they go back and recreate it.
Yeah.
I think that's really neat. That's fun.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's great. And in my family, I don't have that, there's
Yeah.
no legacy of photos that we can go recreate. I have to recreate, in a much more abstract way. So it was pretty cool to have something concrete from someone.
And you mentioned the World War One cemeteries. We went and did that in 2018. We went to Vimy Ridge and we went in the tunnels. And to put yourself there where it's, okay, this was the Canadian line and that was the German line. And they would literally be,
could touch them.
Yeah. Pointing guns at each other. Until you see it in person, you don't really understand it.
Yeah, we have no concept. Even photographs don't really,
No. And Flanders, we went back to Ypres twice and drove the salient route and still didn't see everything that we wanted to see. We walked from the Tyncott Cemetery, we walked the road to Passchendaele, the same ones that the Canadian soldiers would have taken.
Yeah.
And it gives me goosebumps now.
It's something, yeah.
Yeah.
And just to
talking
think,
about it again.
it really brings it all back. Just, I think, to appreciate, even in a small way, anything of the sacrifice, anything of the struggle, anything of, we in Canada have been so fortunate to be away from all that. But if you live in France or Belgium or, anywhere where the war happened, but, there are farms, of course, where they're still finding exploding bombs. I think in London about 2 days ago, they found a World War II unexploded bomb. Like, they find them all the time, and you think, yeah, these countries had war in their backyards, and it's a common experience, but to us, it is an uncommon experience, and that's a huge difference.
Yeah, and Vimy Ridge, a lot of it's fenced off. You can't go through here because there's still
only the
live
sheep.
mines.
Yeah, only the sheep can go in there.
Yeah,
it's true.
And just picturing yourself, like you see the pictures, like you said, what it looked like, and it was blown to pieces, and now it's grass, but you can see the damage is still there.
The craters and
So really, right now is the perfect time to start planning a family history tour. How long does it usually take you to do research for someone?
So that really depends. So I give you two extremes. The shortest, it can take half an hour, and literally what that involves is, okay, what do you already know? And what interests you, and what gaps do you have? So, I'm saying half an hour. If someone spent half an hour with me, I would have a pretty good understanding of, okay, do you want to, like, are you the kind of person who will get really thrilled by going to that house in that village? And then we figure out how to find where the house is. But if they say, no, I know I'm Scottish, or I know I'm Irish, or I know I'm German, and I would like to understand my culture and a bit of where I come from, but I'd really rather play golf to understand that, then that's a whole other kind of trip. But still be immersed in the culture. You can plan your dinners, you can pick places to stay that are historic or give you some insight. You can be directed to, where are those city centers, where are those historic places. If you really want to go deep, it becomes a combination of genealogy and travel. So you are the travel expert. So, I don't do trip planning as such, but I help people find locations. So at the short end, it's like, okay, here's a really short list. We can send this to Charlotte. She'll figure out what to do. If you want to find out, okay, who are the ancestors that I can feel that connection to? The research typically can go in stages, and, sort of 1 to 5 hours at a time. you can start to develop a feeling for, I think we're going to find a lot of people here. Do you want, should we go deeper here, or should we go shallow and look for 3 or 4 more locations in the same region or in the same country, whatever. So it's very tailor-made, but to do it without it being overwhelming, you can go in kind of building blocks. Here's a region that looks interesting. Do you want to drill down, or would you rather find 2 more regions?
Okay.
That kind of choice all the way along. I would caution people, make sure you get the genealogy right, because there's a lot of incorrect family trees out there, lots and lots. So it really is worth your while to have somebody look over what you know directly, and that may be true or untrue, but it's a starting point. And also, before you trust someone else's research, just make sure you know it's reliable.
Well, that probably was going to be my final question, was parting words of advice for someone interested in starting travel. And I think you just
get the
answered that.
genealogy
That's
right.
step one.
If you're doing it, get the genealogy right, and don't be fixated on like the perfect thing. Be open to being like in the town but not finding the house. Just be open to that, because remember, the market square, the bridge, the church, the hills, are all part of your ancestors' lives, and therefore your life. So there's no winning or losing here. Everything's a great experience. You just have to go with the right attitude.
That's beautiful. I wish I would have known you before I went on my travels in 2018 to Europe and Germany, because it would have we thoroughly enjoyed our experience, but it would have made it even that much more deeper and meaningful.
Well, you'll just have to go back, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I do plan on going back.
Of
Hopefully
course.
2022.
taking others, taking a group.
I'm looking at putting a group together for Oberammergau.
That is so fascinating.
Yeah, and hitting up incorporating Lutheran heritage sites into it, because we're Lutherans, so putting some of that, because we visited a lot of those sites when we were in Germany. Because we just missed the Reformation, the 500th year by 1 year when we went. So we went and saw a lot of those, and it's very meaningful to do that. Yeah,
of course. And even for people who aren't Lutheran, if you're just interested in history, I mean, what's more significant in not just religion, but politics, culture? The Reformation is a big deal.
It is a big deal. Yeah, it is a big deal. Those Protestants. So people want to find out more about you. Where's the best place to find you, Jill?
So I have a website, and I'll tell you right now, it's like woefully neglected. And it's kind of ironic, because I am in a deeply immersive genealogy course right now that goes 15 weeks. And it is taking almost all my waking hours. I really love it, but it means the genealogy website is kind of neglected. But the website is genealogyandtravel.com. And I will remind people how to spell genealogy. It's GENEALOGY. So genealogyandtravel.com. You can also find me on Facebook. And if you're really forget how to spell genealogy, just ask Charlotte.
Yeah. And I'll put the link in the comments too. So.
Thanks. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for your time today, Jill.
Oh, thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Enjoy your day. The weather's going to be beautiful today. So
looks beautiful in Saskatchewan behind you.
Sunset. All right. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Bye now.
Bye.